Nuclear energy. 13 years ago, it turned my entire life around. From a day in evacuation to several years contaminated, the Fukushima Daiichi disaster molded my later years. I became an activist, a provider, and a neighbor to anyone in need. My name is Katsuko Arima, and this is the story of how a woman cared for Fukushima when the government wouldn't. Growing up in the 1960s, I was always concerned with our environmental impact on the world. I attended lectures about factory pollution and the mistreatment of native citizens whose land is mined for ore. After the Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island incidents, I was always afraid that something similar would happen here in Japan, but I never suspected it would happen in my own backyard. When the year 2000 came, I opened up a restaurant with my mother. It was a little shop that served vegan dishes, and our motto was feeding the mind, body, and soul. We cultivated healthy dishes and easy recipes, like miso paste and organic cereals. Over time, we learned to be completely self-sufficient. We would grow our own vegetables and serve them ourselves, so that our customers got a meal cared for every step of the way. For about 10 years, things ran like this, until we got face to face on the path of construction. The restaurant wouldn't be able to continue at its current location, so we decided to pack up, rebrand, and move to Sukugawa, Fukushima. It was on March 11th, 2011, when we finally got our permits to operate our restaurant. The new location was called Ginga no Hattori, which translates directly to the edge of the universe. We were ready for a grand opening, a new place to feed and new people to meet. But before we even got a chance, a terrible rumbling shook the world around us. Earthquakes weren't news here in Japan. The island would tremor all the time, but this particular earthquake hit a 7.4 magnitude and took the world down with us. For 3 minutes straight, the rumbling continued. Buildings came down, dust blotted out the sky, and I wasn't even sure if I was alive or not. By some twist of luck or a miracle, Ginga no Hattori was still standing, damaged but repairable. Now we were without food, water, or power, and I evacuated my family to the neighboring Tochigi prefecture to get a hold of ourselves. What shocked us the most was that even after a week, we had no news from the government about what the situation in Fukushima was like. People were displaced from their homes, and nobody had even told us if they were planning to send first aid. It had been enough. I went back to Sukugawa, where I transformed my restaurant into what I always wanted it to be, a place for healthy living where there hardly was any. The building for the Ginga no Hattori became a relief center for survivors, and our self-sustaining growth in food meant that we could feed many families for a long time. To these survivors, the restaurant was a haven for people in the same situation as I was. And with the same irritating question as I had. Where was the government during all this? Shouldn't they be the ones helping families survive? I met with like-minded parents and caretakers who agreed that we would do what they would not, and developed an organization to monitor foods for safe consumption to families in need. It wasn't until 6 months later that we heard our first heads up from the government. The earthquake of the disaster had also caused a tsunami to form shortly after, one that crashed into and severely damaged the Daiichi power plant. Little by little, more scientists showed up in full hazmat gear to reach places that survivors had had full exposure to for months. It wasn't until a Geiger counter was brought into the store that we knew that the area had 5 times the background radiation. No evacuation notice for us, no compensation for health risks, not even so much as emergency funds for us to sustain ourselves. We were furious, but our attention needed to be towards helping each other first. By sheer coincidence, some of our survivors were Europeans who lived through the Chernobyl disaster. They taught us how to prepare dishes that bolstered the body's defenses against radioactivity, and it became a main dish for us at the Ginga no Hattori. From then on, cooking classes became a good way to feed and educate people. Our organization for collecting clean foods for children worked double time to purge our ingredients of radiation. It ended up with us having a permanent device installed to check radiation levels of our foods. But as time went on, and some became self reliable, many were still unsheltered or poor, and even more hadn't seen their families in these years. It is still scary to picture radiation sickness showing its symptoms so many years after the fact, but so long as I have my little shop and my kids to look out for me, I'll always have someone to cook for. Today, I'm still fighting hard for us survivors to get our justice from the government, on top of the business, of course. I've held demonstrations of nuclear symptoms and attended protests in the streets outside the Prime Minister's house. And when that didn't work, I went to Japanese Parliament to talk change for us without an edge of the universe to feed them. While it's slow, I keep going on in hopes that someone notices our continued struggle.